What we have now is a game designer who is on the run from a fanatical group that wants to kill her because of the game that she's developed, and at the same time, in trying to discover whether the game that she's designed is working, she's on the run with a security guard who just by accident happens to be with her, and she encourages him to play the game with her, and so that's where there's this multiple levels of reality that we get into. One of the excitements, of course, about getting into the game in the movie is to find yourself questioning what reality is. To what extent do we create our own reality? To what extent are we all characters in our own game? And you know, as you get older, you begin to realize it becomes a very strongly evident and palpable thing that people define their own characters almost as though they've written them. You decide what things appeal to you about how you project yourself in society and so on. And we all do play certain roles. I did an interview with the writer Salman Rushdie in London for a Canadian magazine called Shift. And I had the inkling before I did the interview, that I might want to do a movie that reflected in some way his situation. That is to say, a writer who had written something that he felt was relatively innocent and suddenly found himself condemned to death in this case, by a militant Islamic group for what he had written. And I thought that it was a really, first of all, of course, a very dramatic and traumatic kind of situation, and one that, as a writer myself, I was interested in exploring. Especially since in movies like The Naked Lunch, I really dealt with, as Burroughs did, the question of a writer having to deal with what he's created, that what he creates becomes a sort of living thing out in the world that can come back to haunt you in many ways, or stalk you in the case of Rushdie. And so when I went to meet him, it wasn't entirely innocent. I had this in my head, and I loved talking to him. He's, of course, a brilliant writer and a wonderful guy, very articulate. And we talked about many things, including a discussion about whether games could be art. Could an artist be a game designer? Could a game designer be an artist? And this really started me thinking about making a game designer the central role in a movie that would be about a kind of Rushdie-like situation. One of the excitements, of course, about getting into the game in the movie is to find yourself questioning what reality is. To what extent do we create our own reality? To what extent are we all characters in our own game? And you know, as you get older, you begin to realize it becomes a very strongly evident and palpable thing that people define their own characters almost as though they've written them. You decide what things appeal to you about how you project yourself in society and so on. And we all do play certain roles. I don't think you have to be a game player to understand the film or to get into it. If you are a game player, then the certain subtleties will make you smile because there's a certain awareness of game playing. And a couple of people have said it exactly replicates how it feels to play a role-playing game, and it's quite spooky that way. But if you've never played a role-playing game, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, just the role-playing that goes on in everyday life is experience enough to relate to the metaphorical use of gaming in the movie.